Welcome to the Insight Meditation community of Charlottesville, Virginia. You can find all of our program offerings and information about our Sangha at www.imeditation.org. We meet weekly on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, currently on the Zoom platform for meditation and a Dharma talk given by one of our teachers. We also meet daily at noon Eastern Time on Zoom for sitting practice. We hope you can join us.
And so again, greetings. And I guess I hardly need to say it, that these times have been harrowing. We all know that. And that's what I call the title of this talk, Rising to the Challenge. And I probably should have said challenges of harrowing times. As I was writing this talk, it was not clear whether there was going to be violence in the capital, violence in state capitals. That was what we were warned of, the possibility. And it still actually isn't clear with regard to tomorrow, though I think there's great hope that that's not going to happen. A lot of questions, I think, are in all of our minds, and how could it be otherwise, about what's the impact of these past 4 years of all the violence, all the uncertainty, the difficulties. What's the impact for the future? And of course, we can't know. And I'm going to want to say right up as I begin this talk that actually, I didn't want to do this talk. This has been a real struggle for me. And I was told somebody that talk has been writing and rewriting itself daily. Everything is so unknown. And yet there's so much hope for what will happen tomorrow. And I thought it would be easy, and maybe too easy, to make this a talk of hope for the future. It would have been a whole lot more pleasant to do that. And yet I've really I just see I've been muted. Have I been muted the whole time? I've been talking and it just went muted. Okay, great. So all the pain of the past is so present with us. It's present in our bodies and our minds. And I felt this talk, I think, really needs to take a look at what are the challenges we face now, even as we go into this new administration. I mean, not only the challenge we personally, although that I would like to focus on as well, and we as a nation. So the questions we always ask as contemplatives and are still asking is, how do we hold this in the current moment? How do we live with some peace, some contentment, happiness now? Really big questions at this time of tremendous shift and change. I thought I would start, and maybe it needs no reminding, but I'm going to read a comment about the social political unrest that we've just been through, because it's so well stated. And this is a comment by a man named John Wood Jr. And he's from an organization that's called Braver Angels. And he says, a long arc of disintegrating trust between the American people and their institutions, and the American people in one another, has allowed us to careen into alternate realities, where a few desperately feel that there is no recourse by which to redress their grievances except for violence. Meanwhile, many more feel unwilling to communicate across the divide that allows this despair to arise. Unwilling to communicate across the divide. I think we all know what he means. And I will say, certainly in these past months, that I, and perhaps you as well, have tried to understand the factors that have been motivated have motivated people to support Mr. Trump. And I try to remember, I think as we all do, that these are human beings worthy of our compassion as every other human being is, as we are. I know and wish for them peace, finding peace and happiness. And I admit, I think as we all do, that despite our good wishes, despite those intentions, I certainly have found times of outrage and of anger, but all my good intentions haven't eliminated those. And I will say that although for sure the inciter in chief, Mr. Trump, is leaving the national scene for now, he's going, but the challenges that have been stirred up, these remain. So I have found it for myself helpful, especially writing this talk, thinking about it, to take a look at some of the underlying factors, the profound changes that have caused people to be so disaffected. And I want to share some of these with you, although you probably know all of them. And I'll say I'm not focusing on the radical, the fringe groups, nor do I want to focus on the wealthy conservatives who haven't been speaking up much, but rather on those people from the small towns and rural communities that have seen fundamental changes in their life and who perhaps don't have the education or the resources to respond to them. And I see a few factors that I'm just going to highlight briefly that have been powerful in eroding the traditional bulwarks of life of people in those areas. And one of them is the technological change, of course. The exponential development of technology in recent years can leave us all feeling inadequate. I certainly know that. But what about people in small towns who don't have the education or the resources to keep up? Maybe don't have ready access to the internet or are just getting it. How must they feel? I've tried to put myself in that place and realize how like a technological dinosaur I have felt at times. What about them? What about them? Also, other technological changes, which we've all heard about. Traditional industries have left rural areas. They've been outdated as a result of technology. And there's the media, speaking of technology. In recent years, many of the trusted local radio stations in programs in rural areas and small towns have been bought up by right-wing interests. And people in these areas continue to listen to them. I mean, they are not attuned. They're usually focused on rural areas, on their local community, not attuned to going to big city or other outlets. And in addition to that, as we know, right-wing television and social media, a powerful mix that's been reinforced time and again. That's one factor, technological change with all its many impacts. A second factor that we know well, and that is demographics. We are becoming ever more so a multicultural nation. And here are a few statistics. Since the 1950s, the number of non-Hispanic white people has been decreasing. Currently, just under 60% of the population in this country is white. By 2045, it's estimated that white people will be in the minority. Now, I don't know the exact statistics, but it's likely that a good portion of the Trump supporters in rural areas feel threatened by this multiculturalism, even if it isn't showing up specifically in their own areas, and certainly they have been incited to feel uncomfortable. CNN commentator Van Jones commented that the Trump victory in 2016 was a result of what he called whitelash. That is the reaction by white people who feel threatened by diversity. And we've watched whitelash grow more and more virulent during these past 4 years. It's make America white again, is how some people will see that. There's a third factor that I think should be borne in mind, and that is religion. Especially among some evangelicals, the call is make America Christian again. And it is true that the percent of people identifying as Christian is declining. And again, statistics. In 2019, 65% of the adult population in this country identified as Christian, 65%. In 1990, the number was 85%. But the fact is that other people, those of us who claim identification with all other religions, aside from Christianity, all other religions account for only 5%, a little bit more than 5% of the rest of the population. And that is, again, statistics. 2.2% are Jewish, 1.1% Islam, Muslims, and Buddhists, and that is Asian Buddhists, are only 1%, along with Hindus, those who affiliate with the Hindu religion, also 1%. So that makes something like 5.3% of the remaining population or other religions. So that leaves a big gap, and that is like 23% of the population claim to be non-affiliated in terms of religion. And that's a growing number. That's where the big number comes from. In terms of the decline in affiliation with the Christian religion. And mainly those who are unaffiliated are young people. It's the young people who are turned off by the politicization of religion, who are claiming themselves unaffiliated. So the point here, in terms of the point I am making here, is that, in fact, the decline in affiliation with Christianity isn't related to religious diversity. Only 5% are other religions. But with a passion so inflamed, it looks like it's perceived that way, that it is a result, by some, as a result of diversity. A fourth factor, and that is historical racism, which we know so well. And the appalling reality, just briefly, of slavery, which Ruth King, our teacher who has often taught us, calls America's birth defect, slavery. And after slavery, the Jim Crow era. And I know a lot of us are very familiar now with Jim Crow, but just in case you are not, the Jim Crow era, from the end of the Civil War up to the Civil Rights Movement, was that period when Blacks were all but treated as slaves. The white prejudice, the white convictions of superiority, of supremacy that was born during slavery were channeled against Blacks during the era following the Civil War, in which throughout the South, Blacks were systematically arrested with no or flimsiest of accusations. They were imprisoned, sent to big Southern enterprises, and worked virtually again as slaves. But even worse, because the owners of the big operation didn't care at all whether they lived or died. There was always a steady supply of more workers coming and going. So this is the Jim Crow era in the shortest, briefest thumbnail description. And I will say, if you're unfamiliar with it, the outlines of it and the details of it have only recently become more well-known publicly. In fact, for years, Black people understandably didn't want to talk about it. Now it's known, and I recommend for you a book by Douglas Blackman. Judy is going to be putting it there. She's got it. Putting it into chat. Slavery by Another Name. Powerful book about what the Jim Crow era was, which is stunning if you don't know about it. A couple of years ago, I think it was 2019, the Venerable Panyawati, who is a monastic, a monastic and a Black woman, came to IMCC and led a retreat. And during that retreat, she was commenting, the comment was raised about police brutality, where they could kill with impunity Black people. And Venerable Panyawati commented, this is very true. She said, however, during Jim Crow, anybody could kill a Black person with impunity. And for that little piece of information, I thank Phil Schroet, who reminded me of it. Anybody could kill a Black person with impunity. Things have changed now, but I think it underlines, for me, powerfully, as uncomfortable as these past few years have been, and frightening as they have been in many ways, it has always been uncomfortable and frightening for a Black person to live in this country. It's never been easy. So we at IMCC are part of this growing momentum and work in anti-racism. And we are involved in that in many ways. We've talked about it many times. I think all of this, as we've said, really has underscored our commitment to bridging separation, of working with diversity. And I'm not going to reiterate, because we've done that several times, the many ways IMCC is involved, and I know many of you are and have been and will be, hopefully, involved in the anti-racism work. What I want to talk about tonight is another way I'd like to highlight, another way in which diversity and work in diversity is occurring, arising now in our era. And that is the diversity among whites, a new challenge. And that is a challenge of bridging separation among whites, among the reds and the blues, the conservatives and the Christians. It's existed for a long time. It's not new that there are conservative and really conservative and even fringe conservative people. It's been healthy. We've needed a balance in terms of conservative and liberal and people working together. It's never just one view that will help make a democracy work. But the way in which it has grown up during the Trump administration has been toxic. I think we all know this. So what I would like to point out, and I mentioned it at the beginning, is the organization that's known as Braver Angels. Braver Angels, and this was the organization of John Wood when I read his quote at the beginning. Braver Angels started in 2016. And it's a national citizens organization, and their mission is to bring liberals and conservatives, blues and reds together. And their mission is to bridge the partisan divide by helping people listen to each other and understand beyond stereotypes. We're all so aware how we have devolved into, and we've become polarized and devolved into really binary thinking. It's either us or it's them. And there's been so often just no give on that. It's become more and more rigidified. Braver Angels believes in now in adopting an entirely a new spirit in our relations with each other. And that is the spirit of love and respect. And they, instead of calling each other out, They hope that we can call each other in. And their latest podcast, which is on their website and free to listen to, is called Calling Out, Calling In, and Where to Draw the Line. In December, Braver Angels reps, our former Braver Angels reps, met with some of us IMCC members. And last week, they held a national seminar, Braver Angels did, in which I attended. And the seminar is called Holding America Together. More than 4,500 people across the country attended. This is beginning. There are people across the country, both conservative and liberal, who see the need for us to bridge this divide. So Braver Angels, what they do is they sponsor workshops and seminars. They teach skills for bridging differences and other events where people talk to people. Some of them are really small events, and this is what they hope to propagate. Small events at grassroots levels, alliances they call them, where some members are red and some are blue, and people speak and listen to each other, hearing each other, not trying to convince each other who is right and who is wrong. So Judy is putting their website up on chat, and maybe it's already there, in case this is something that you, yep, she's got it there. There it is, braverangels.org, in case some of you are interested. To my understanding, this is not something that IMCC as an organization would join. This is something they're interested, I believe, if I learn any different, I will discuss it, but I understand they're interested in individuals signing up for these seminars or signing up and just listening to their podcasts and whatever. It's important. It's important. Talk about rising to the challenge of our time. Braver Angels is one way that people are beginning to try to do this. So I'd like to talk about challenges in another way, on a more personal level, I guess you'd say, as contemplatives that we face. And I'm going to read a quote by Pema Chodron that I came across the other day that I think is so important in many respects. She says in her, and this is in Welcoming the Unwelcome, the time we live in is a fertile ground for training in being open-minded and open-hearted. If we can learn to hold this falling apartness without polarizing and without becoming fundamentalists, then whatever we do today will have a positive effect on the future. Working with polarization and dehumanization won't put an immediate end to the ignorance, violence, and hatred that plague this world. But every time we catch ourselves polarizing with our thoughts, words, or actions, and every time we do something to close that gap, we're injecting just a little bit of bodhicitta, which means awakening mind, a little bit of awakening mind into our usual patterns. We're deepening our appreciation for our interconnectedness with all others. We're empowering healing rather than standing in its way. And because of this interconnectedness, when we change our own patterns, we help change the patterns for our culture as a whole. I think so powerfully said. Certainly, I think all of us aspire to it. And it's not easy. I mean, for us as individuals, our national culture has become coarsened. The way we talk to each other has become more coarse, is binary thinking, this polarization. And it is so easy, I have found, and I think you probably have too, to be drawn into it, to respond not in like content, but perhaps in like tone. I mean, I get emails frequently from liberal organizations that are just florid in their tones. And I'll just give you an example of one that came in my inbox just the other day from some Democratic organization, I never heard of them, called the Inauguration Viewing Party. And they were asking me, maybe you got it too, asking me to commit to watching the inauguration online, sign up here, there, whatever they are, and let them know. They said, commit to watching the inauguration online in order to, and I quote, in order to blow Trump's inauguration attendance numbers out of the water. And then in italics, it will be humiliating, exclamation point, end of quote. That's it, right? Okay, that's a really extreme example, a really graphic example, but we hear it all the time. I think we need to be sensitive to it. Actually, it's not just political. This is our spiritual work. This is our spiritual work. If we are to progress along these paths, taking the easy, the conventional tone that people are using without thinking of it, this does not help. It hinders, it hinders. And I like what Pema Chodron said. She calls this fertile time for change, but she didn't say it's easy. She didn't say it's easy, and it's not. So I wanted to share with you some stock that I have taken about myself and some unwholesome patterns that have developed. And one of them is what I'm calling addiction to the news. You know, I feel, and I think we all do, that it's a civic responsibility to listen to the news. But for me, and I suspect for many of you, it did get way out of hand, where I was checking the news many times daily. And of course, there were such events that were occurring. We wanted to know. I picked up Wikipedia's definition of addiction, and I'm not going to go in, time is limited, but it fits for what I was doing. Many times daily, so I was searching out pieces, especially interested in pieces that were critical of Trump and his family. And I took a kind of perverse pleasure in reading some of the more egregious stuff. And it kept going on. It kept going on. And I will say also too, some of the late night shows. Now, I mean, I love Trevor Noah. I think Jimmy Kimmel is great, and many of the others. But I noticed that when I watched and when I was laughing at the satire, and Saturday Night Live, I mean, really. But I noticed that my laughter wasn't wholesome. This was not arousing the better angels of my nature. That's taken from, of course, Lincoln's very famous comment about we must arouse the better angels of our nature during the Civil War. No, it was not. So I noticed too that it was kind of like quicksand pulling me in, and was having an impact in other areas of my life. I was having more trouble sleeping. I was noticing the content of my thoughts tended to be kind of random, but often tending toward much more violence. I went on a retreat in December, and my rule for myself that I set was no news, and it was surprisingly easy to observe that. And what happened was almost immediately, I noticed the difference in my body. There was a tremendous relaxation. There was a freeing up of some part of my mind that had been focusing and guarded against all of this tenseness that was happening in our public life. So I have made some resolutions now, no longer on retreat. And I have to say I've broken them a bit ever since the Capitol was stormed on the 6th. But nonetheless, I'm not going to be going back to that addiction to the news. And I'm sharing that with you in case this resonates with you in any way. I have canceled my subscription to the New York Times, and I'm going to be watching the news maybe one time daily. If not that, I'll be watching NPR more often because it is pretty objective. I also found that my compassion had constricted during this period. It was harder to be compassionate. I think something has opened up now more, back to something more wholesome. And along with all of the addiction to the news came stereotyping, part of this constriction, in which I tended to judge people. I would look at somebody and when I was out and wonder, decide whether they were red or blue. Somebody not wearing a mask, there was an edge to me. Somebody not very responsible, who doesn't care about all kinds of judgments. Is this wholesome? No, it's not. So as these are simply part of my recognition of challenges that I need to meet. Challenges that I need to meet. I'm remembering too, going on. No, I think I will quote them, two short quotes, the Buddha from the Dhammapada. And one of them is, we are what we think, having become what we thought. We are what we think, having become what we thought. All of these violent thoughts aren't just out there. They're not just reserved for the Trump administration or what we've gone through. We become what we think, having become what we thought. And he also said, in this world, hate has never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. Both of those are powerful and I think deserve to be remembered. I do. So I'd like to talk just for a few minutes more about challenges, because these are pretty powerful ones. And I would say, I think challenges don't need to be regarded as enemies. We can see them, and I hope to see them, and mine, as aids as I pursue along the spiritual path. We can grow in our spiritual work, work as contemplatives as a result of our challenges. It's our choice. I have been walking a good deal over at Ivy Creek, the natural area. And I've been noticing the trees there in a new way. I think most of us really like the trees that are upright and tall and straight, but I have been noticing the trees that are bent and gnarled. And there is one tree in particular, and let's see if I'm asking Judy, I took a photo of it, if she would put it up. This is it's a tulip poplar, a very large tulip poplar that grows over on the concrete path near there it is. Okay, on the thank you, Judy. Concrete path near the parking lot. If you can take a look at it, it's huge. It must be, I'm not good at measurements, but maybe 50, 60, 70 feet tall. And as you can see, here's the main trunk. Here's the second trunk, which is tree size in itself. And when you look closely, you can see that the main trunk, and it doesn't show so clearly here, but has added a whole lot of wood along this side in order to support itself. And this secondary trunk, which goes out many, many, many feet, has also added a whole lot of wood in order to support itself. This tree has a story. And I've wondered what the story was many years ago. What made it take this shape? The story is its challenge. And as you can see, this tree has met its challenge and has thrived. And I think the analogy is clear. We've all got our challenges. We too can thrive. We can thrive with our challenges. And the tree reminds me of something else. And that is that, you know, our challenges aren't personal. In fact, they're not even related to human beings exclusively. All living things face challenges. Trees face them in tree ways, and we, humans, face them in human ways. So challenges, I think it's something that we can maybe adopt this broader recognition. Here's an aid to help me grow. An aid to help me grow. Now, to conclude this talk, what I wanted to do was to share with you excerpts from two poems. The first is going to be an excerpt for us as we face challenges. And the second one is an excerpt from a poem for the country. So the first poem or excerpt I've actually read before, and I think it was here at a Tuesday night meeting, but maybe it was at a noonday meeting. But at any rate, it is In Any Dark Time by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, an excerpt. And she says, in any dark time, there is a tendency to veer toward fainting over how much is wrong or unmended in the world. Do not focus on that. There is a tendency to fall into being weakened by dwelling on what is outside your reach, by what cannot yet be. Do not focus there. We are needed. That is all we know. And though we meet resistance, we more so will meet great souls who will hail us, love us, and guide us. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. Any small, calm thing that one soul can do to help another, to assist some small portion of this poor suffering world will help immensely. One of the most powerful and calming actions you can take is to intervene in a stormy world. To intervene in a storming world is to stand up and show your soul. Souls on deck shines like gold in dark times. The light of the soul throws sparks, can send up flares, build signal fires, cause proper matters to catch fire. To display the lantern of soul in shadowy times like these, to be fierce and to show mercy towards others both, are acts of immense bravery and of greatest necessity. Struggling souls catch light from others who are fully lit and willing to show it. If you would help calm the tumult, this is one of the strongest things you can do. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe. There can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are for. Again, Clarissa Pinkola Estes for us. And the second one is an excerpt from a poem by Walt Whitman, 19th century poet, from his poem, long poem, Song of Myself. And he said, and this is for the nation, he was speaking, I am old and young, of the foolish as much as the wise, regardless of others, ever regardful of others, maternal as well as paternal, a child as well as a man, stuffed with the stuff that is coarse and stuffed with the stuff that is fine. Out of the nation of many nations, the smallest the same and the largest the same. A southerner as well as a northerner. Comrade of raftsmen and coalmen, comrade of all who shake hands and welcome to drink and meet. A learner with the simplest, a teacher of the thoughtfulest, a novice beginning, yet experienced of myriads of seasons. Of every hue and caste I am, of every rank and religion, of farmer, mechanic, artist, gentleman, sailor, Quaker, prisoner, fancy man, rowdy, lawyer, physician, and priest. I resist anything better than my own diversity. Breathe the air, but leave plenty for me. I'm not stuck up, and I am in my place. So that's Walt Whitman with a prayer for all of us and the nation. So I thank you And I know I bless us all, as well as the incoming administration,